Well, at first glance, this morning's two stories, which the author of Mark's Gospel has laid out side by side for the reader, seem to have little in common with each other, besides the fact that they are miracle stories which reveal Jesus' healing powers. One story is about a woman's daughter who is healed, and the other is about a man who is healed. One story is about a desperate person who breaks protocol and arrives unannounced. The other is about someone who was ushered to Jesus by his friends. In one story, the healing takes place from a distance without even seeing the daughter or speaking to her. In the other story, Jesus' encounter is intimate and involves touch. There doesn't seem to be much in common between the stories besides the actual healings that took place. And if that is all that they were intended to reveal, I think that would be enough. But I think maybe they reveal even more to us. Maybe there really is a connection between them. So let's begin with the first story. In this story, we find Jesus and his disciples hanging out within the Gentile region of Tyre. We don't know what Jesus and his disciples were doing there. All we know is they didn't want anyone to know they were there. Maybe Jesus had stirred up the authorities so much with his combative words and controversial teachings that he decided it might be a good idea to lay low for a while. Or maybe they had been working so hard at feeding the hungry and healing the sick that they decided to take a break. And so they headed over to the seaside resort area for a little rest and relaxation. We don't know what they were up to, but we can be pretty sure it wasn't to preach to the Gentiles. Jesus bluntly states that taking the gospel message to the Gentiles is not a part of his mission. Or at least it's not on the priority list. In fact, Jesus is more than blunt to the woman. He's rude. And that's something that makes us uncomfortable because it doesn't fit so nicely into our image of Jesus. Jesus is supposed to be nice and compassionate. He's supposed to make time for everyone, but he doesn't seem to want to make time for this particular woman. Some Bible scholars have tried to explain it away to the reader. Some say he was probably very exhausted, very tired, and she caught him at a bad time and he just snapped at her. I don't buy it. He didn't snap at his fellow Jews when he was exhausted and tired. Some Bible scholars say that Jesus and the woman were simply enjoying a friendly debate. We misinterpret the text, they say, when we read that Jesus was calling her a dog. Jesus was actually referring to her as a friendly little house pet, and he no doubt said it with a twinkle in his eye to test the persistence of the woman's faith. And since she answered correctly, he rewarded her faith and quick wit with a healing to go. Again, I'm not buying it. There's nothing to indicate a twinkle in his eye, and this argument simply sounds too much like a feeble attempt to excuse a racist remark. Some scholars even declare his response to be inauthentic. They propose that it derives from conservative Jewish Christians, and it was later modified by moderate Jewish Christians who added the words attributed to the Gentile woman. That doesn't work for me either. What does work for me is that he would have been aware of the economic hardship that many Jews in the region of Tyre experienced due to the exploits of the Gentile landowners. And his rebuff to the Syrophoenician woman may well have reflected this. What does work for me is that a bunch of Jewish men were stunned that a Gentile woman would interrupt their time together, and so she received the sharp edge of Jesus' tongue as a result. What does work for me is that this Gentile woman's faith in Jesus' healing power takes him by surprise because it's greater than that of his own people, including the members of his hometown, among whom he could not perform deeds of power because of their unbelief. But more than anything else, what works for me is that Jesus experienced a shift in his attitude. His mind was opened by this woman's words. The heart of Jesus was touched, even moved in new directions, not by faith, but by love. The mother love that is at the heart of God's own love. Something deep inside Jesus remembers and recognizes this. We might even say that something in Jesus' heart and mind and plans was opened up by this love. What works for me is that the story is a kind of conversion moment for Jesus, in which he realizes how he had lost sight of the point of his mission and has to be reconnected with it by someone assumed to be outside of it. For Mark's gospel, then, the woman is more than simply a Gentile with a quick wit. She is prophetic. She is the embodiment of Isaiah, which says, "It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth." It's often during our times of tension and conflict that we rediscover who we are and what our calling is. For example, when people are diagnosed with illness, they often come to the awareness that each moment we have on this earth is a precious gift from God and not to be taken for granted. When we grieve the loss of a life or a relationship, we remember once again the sacred value of each person we encounter. Most recently, I had a conflict that reminded me of the mission to which this church is called. As many of you know, we are going through some renovations of our church building in order to bring it up to code in a way that satisfies the city inspector's office. So recently, when the inspector came for a visit and pointed out that our restrooms needed to be designated men and ladies, he probably wasn't prepared for me to simply say no. I asked him where transgender people are supposed to go. He said, "I don't know, but that's the city code." And I replied, "Then we need to see about getting the city code changed, don't we?" Our conversation was over more than just a debate about bathroom signs. It was over the rights and recognition of a population of people who are ignored, mistreated, and even violated by our society. Our church is called to be the voice for the voiceless, and I was reminded of that fact last week. The instant helped me refocus and remember what our mission is, much like Jesus must have remembered his own with his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. And once he did, once his own mind was opened, he was equipped to open up others. In this case, he went on to open up the ears of a deaf man, another Gentile, in fact. There's no telling how Jesus might have responded to this Gentile man seeking healing had he not already had his own conversion experience with the Syrophoenician woman. But instead, after remembering his calling was to all people, even those who are different from him, he was kind and respectful and loving with this deaf Gentile. That's why I think the stories are laid side by side. I think we are meant to see how Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman affected his ministry. And we see the effect with his compassionate and loving encounter with the deaf man. This church is called to be the voice of justice for people who are voiceless. If we don't speak up, who will? We are called to be compassionate and loving to everyone, but especially to those who experience prejudice on a daily basis. We are called to educate ourselves and others about marginalized people. And we will be doing that on Saturday, September 22nd, with a church workshop about transgender issues. It's important. It's a major part of this church's calling. I hope you will be there. It may be an opportunity for you to have your own conversion experience, your own chance to be opened. But until then, may each of us discover the wideness of God's love for all people. And may we each reflect that love in our daily lives. Amen.